advisors with trying that's okay with trying to get in front of students having struggles in science classes because they just don't know what to expect. So we've been trying to talk for a while about the best ways to do this. Of course, we can talk to students about it when they come to us, but most of the time they wait until they're already struggling and potentially having failed exams or just too far behind to even be able to pass the class. So we created this presentation this year under that opportunity to meet with students before the semester started. So the presentation that we're going to share, we actually created under the lens of giving it to students, and our target audience for this presentation were incoming first-year students. And so we had close to 30 students sit in on our presentation just the Friday before classes started. So let me get my screen sharing and all right, so the official presentation, and hopefully everyone can see the PowerPoint, is Study Skills for Success in the Sciences. And from here, we just wanted to remind students as well that we're attending the presentation that we represent specific science departments, and that was what we're going to focus on for resources. But a lot of what we covered in the presentation can be applied to not just even their STEM courses. They can apply the skills and resources to a lot of their courses outside of the science as well. So take it away, Erin.
Hey, so for anybody that I don't know, my name's Erin Bachert. I'm an advisor from the Department of Chemistry, and so I was the chemistry biochemistry section of that list of all the different topics. We started by talking to the students about the differences between high school science courses, community college science courses, and university level science courses, because like Becca said, this presentation was geared mostly towards FDX students. And they come with a variety of different backgrounds. Some of them have dual enrollment. Some of them have only done high school credits, but they did AP or IB coursework. But we basically wanted to explain to students that when they're taking their high school courses, those classrooms are more smaller, structured, controlled learning environments. They have friends in the classroom that they've known from other classes. They get to know the instructor a lot better because they're going to see them regularly. And they're in the classroom with like maybe 20, 30 students. They provide a broader overview of the material, usually in the high school science courses, and they teach a lot for the exam. We're seeing this a lot with like our AP students, where they come, they have AP credit, they pass the AP exam, but they're not as comfortable applying knowledge outside of what they covered specifically for that exam. I have students repeating Gen Chem regularly because they didn't feel they learned as much as they should have, even though they got AP credit for it. So what happens is there's a lot more memorization and less problem solving. The students can do really well in these courses with the memorization and less problem solving, but it doesn't always prepare them for the next level courses that they're going to be taking at the university. Community college classes, the sizes are smaller than what we have at Wayne State and university courses in general. They're a lot more flexible with scheduling, so they can have some evening sections, whereas we have set lecture times where we're trying to, provide our students times around the grid of other science courses that they will be taking. Like, we don't want to overlap with certain bio, certain physics, certain math courses. So we have sort of a set schedule, and there might be only one lecture available. They only teach introductory topics, 1,000 to 2,000 level science courses at the community college. So a lot of students are asking, can I take my biochemistry outside? It's just not going to happen. Bio 3100 or Chem 5600 pull from organic chemistry and multiple semesters of general chemistry. So those students have to take those at a four-year institution. They do not cover topics to the same rigor as four-year universities. So we'll see that with students coming in when they have prereqs done outside, that things are a little bit different. And even students talk to us and tell us, like, I have students tell me they didn't cover stoichiometry in their introductory chemistry course, which is shocking to me to find out, because there's a little bit more flexibility in what they're teaching in each individual section. For the university level, our courses are large. They're 100 to 400 students a lot of times for these introductory courses. And they go into more depth and detail in a subject at a very fast pace. Our instructors, especially for our department, we're accredited through the American Chemical Society, so there's a list of specific topics that we have to hit, and our faculty have to include all that information, and they're very aware that like what they're teaching is going to go to the next course. So if they don't cover a topic in Gen Chem 1, that's going to, hurt the students when they get to Gen Chem 2 at Wayne State, and their colleagues are going to get mad at them. So they make sure that they cover everything that they have to cover each semester. Students are required to be independent learners by applying that knowledge to new situations. So they might give them examples, just a couple. They'll give them the concepts, but they're expecting the students to practice applying these concepts to new problems throughout the week. They should be practicing so that when they get to the exams, they're able to solve a brand new version of that problem. When they get to standardized exams like the MCAT, they're able to apply that knowledge to those questions as well. Everything that is covered for these courses is fair game. So they're going to lecture to you. You need to take notes. You need to attend class. Everything they cover could be on the exam. You may or may not get a study guide. If you do get a study guide, it's not going to outline every single thing that's going to be on the exam. It's just going to be like some basic information. And we also tell our students that they need to be taking less science courses per semester than what they're doing in high school, or even if they're doing dual enrollment at the community college. Our first year students, we don't want them in any more than one science course in their first term. So they'll take one science course with a math course. Second semester, they might start doubling up if they're ready. Like not everybody's ready, so you got to talk to the student, but that's when they might start doubling up. It's only until much later in our curriculum, like for biochemistry, where they're taking maybe 3 together. They're never doing more than 2 laboratories in a term. And the 3 that they're taking together are all complementary, like they're covering similar topics so that they work well together. But students work up to that. They have to get their foundation knowledge first. And we struggled with that at orientation a lot because the students come in, they want to take biochemistry, physics all together in their first semester. They're going to graduate in 3 years. And we were always like, no, stop, you can't do all that. So we're structuring our students to take less per semester. And main things that we want our students to consider when they're coming to the 4-year institution is that they have to be more disciplined in their studying, and they have to find time and scheduling it out. And we're going to talk about different ways they can get more individual attention in this presentation too, since we're bigger classroom environments. And we explain to the students that if they're going to the community college, because many of our students are going to go to the community college in a summer or at different times, or they're bringing in credits already, that they really got to talk to their advisor. We want to make sure they're in the right courses because community college courses can be starting and stopping at different places. So I never want like a student to take Orgo 1 at Schoolcraft and then plan to come to Wayne State for Orgo 2 if they can avoid it, because it just doesn't flow as well if they're doing a sequence from different schools. So we talk about it. We try and find out what, finances, I get it. Sometimes they have to take a course outside, but we talk about what might be the best one. And we want to make sure the students are taking courses that are going to transfer. We want to know their goals. If they're planning to apply to a really competitive medical school program, we're not going to necessarily recommend their prerequisite coursework for that program since we know it's preferred to be done at a 4-year institution. So we'll talk to the student to find out what are the best options for them. And we stress to them that Wayne State has research active faculty, and you're going to benefit from that. Even though they're big classrooms, you're talking to faculty members that are teaching you how to apply the subject in their laboratories. They use it daily. So you're learning a different perspective, and you want to benefit from that, and you want to make use of time to get to know your faculty member when you can. Even if it's a big class, you still want to talk to your instructors. But I'm going to let Becca take over for the
All
study
right.
time.
So after we give all that information to them, we wanted to talk to them about how to kind of allocate their time. So first, the rule though that we wanted to share with them is what they should be expecting now that they're going to be independent learners, with how they should be divvying up their time. So We tell students for planning purposes, the general rule that we're going to follow is that basically you want to triple the number of credits that you're in to get the total number of hours you should be dedicating to school. So that's going to include both the hours that you're coming to campus to learn or attending online courses, but then also the time you need to be dedicating outside of the classroom to preparing for class and studying for the material. So we give the example of the 15 credit hour semester. That means you're going to be roughly on campus or in classes for 15 hours a week. Although we remind them labs are actually more time, even though they're only one credit. So it's likely you're actually going to be on campus or in class more than 15 hours a week. But in terms of how much time they should be studying, we recommend a minimum of 30 hours throughout the week to prepare for classes, review the material, and meet with study groups to pretend to attend office hours, et cetera. So we tell them that's right there is 45 hours a week. That's more than a full-time worker does. And then we also have to remind students too that their schedule needs to account for if they're a commuting student. They need to make sure they have time to eat and sleep properly. So we did talk about when you're an active learner, you should be getting 7 to 9 hours of consecutive sleep. That's important for your brain to rest and remember information appropriately and have time to wipe out and kind of reset itself overnight. So anytime students are sleeping for less than 7 hours minimum, they're shortchanging their ability to learn and be committed. And then we also wanted to remind students too that it's very important to not just be focused on school. As human beings, we need to interact with people that are important to us and have things that make us happy or relax or refresh. And so they should make sure that there's time for that in their schedule too. And then, of course, we wanted to account many students have work or other responsibilities that they need to accommodate as well. So we broke it down for them. He said, okay, we're all sciences. We like numbers, right? So there's 168 hours in the week, period. There's no change. You take 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So that's how many hours there are. So if you're spending roughly 49 hours a week sleeping, 15 hours in class, maybe even up to 18, 30 hours schedule or studying for classes, and then maybe you're a commuting student. You've got 10 hours a week that you're commuting to and from campus. That's for a 30-minute drive, parking, walking to buildings, etc. That right there only leaves you then 60 hours left in the rest of the week. So about 8.5 hours a day to eat, work, volunteer, see people that are important to you, have time to relax and be a human. So that's a lot of time right there. And many students don't have that commitment because of work and things like that. So we also created a schedule. I hope this works. Did it flip to the schedule? Perfect. So I created a schedule of what that might start to look like if you start to divvy this up throughout the week. And I even told them I don't even have to follow the schedule, and it was starting to make me anxious just looking at it. So this would be a schedule for students sleeping the minimum of 7 hours a week, attending a bio, a math, an English, and a sociology class. So that's roughly 15 credit hours for the semester. Prepping for math every day because math is a class that you need to review your problems and practice consistently. Same thing for bio. It's a big class with lots of information, so you need to make sure you're reviewing a little bit every day. English and sociology are going to be heavier for reading and writing, so you still need to make sure you dedicate time for those classes as well. And so I didn't complete the schedule, but I just started to show them what it would look like and how congested it gets fast and how much little time there is for flexibility. And then if they're having to add a job on top of this or family responsibilities, we just basically wanted to reiterate the point that not every student should be in 15, 16, 17, 18 credits a semester if they have a lot of other responsibilities. So then let me exit that. Okay. I think I have to exit this. There we go. So then I moved into talking about the study cycle because we wanted to give them a little bit more information about what we meant by prepping before class and then reviewing after class. So we looked at the 5-stage study cycle with the pre-lecture prep, active learning, post-lecture review, and then some additional steps on another slide that we'll review in a minute. But for pre-lecture prep, I let students know that we want them, or the professors expect them to come prepared to lecture. So it's maybe different than high school where you're going to wait till you get to class and then get introduced to the material. The professors are going to expect that you've already introduced yourself to the material before class. So we talked to them about reviewing the slides if those are pre-sent out or reviewing the textbook chapters if not, or maybe both, familiarizing themselves with graphs, pictures, and terminology before lecture started so that they're not getting tripped up by phrases or words that they've never heard before. That leads to better active learning in class, where we talk about making sure that students are taking notes. And I know a lot of students love their technology and love to type and things like that, but we did remind students that handwriting is best, as much as possible to help you remember and process the information. But we also talked about in lecture, making sure that they're adding notes and questions as soon as they're starting to feel uncomfortable with material or unsure, so that they know kind of where they need to touch base after lecture. Where possible, we encourage them to ask questions during class, but we know, which is with the sizes of a lot of our science classes, students don't get the opportunity to stop lecture to ask questions. So making sure that they're writing out clear questions that they can go to office hours after lecture and get confirmation on. And then we like to remind students that they do better when they attend. And so, yes, most of your classes are not going to take attendance because they just don't have time, but that does not mean attendance isn't important and professors don't care if you're not there. In fact, many of our professors get frustrated when they see not a lot of students in the classroom. And I've had a few professors actually go back and correlate attendance to grades. And there is a strong argument that being there helps you perform better in the class, even for a science class that's being recorded that you could watch later. So we actually reiterated this a few times throughout the presentation. We talked to them about doing post-lecture reviews. So within 24 hours of finishing a lecture, making sure that they're going back and adding to their notes, maybe using the textbook here to fill out where they were kind of light, maybe comparing notes with other students in class as well to see what they've missed, and making sure that for any questions they wrote down, that they are getting the answers to those questions. And we talked about this being important because before you can study and before you can start to review information, you have to understand it first. So we talked to them about the importance of short, frequent reviews with information so that they're connecting with the information repeatedly throughout the week, making sure that they're asking the more in-depth questions, the why, the how, the what if, because understanding the material on that level will help them answer test questions better. We also reminded them that it's important to interact with the material. So don't just go back and reread your notes for studying, but test your comprehension, work with other students to make sure that you're assessing your learning. And then we reminded them too that they shouldn't be sitting down and expecting that they're going to just spend 8 hours on Saturday studying. That's not realistic. These study breaks, you should have study breaks, and you really should be divvied up throughout the week. And we did talk a little bit more about, again, assessing learning and teaching, explaining in your own words or teaching concepts to others to make sure that you really have a good comprehension of the material. Um, and then from there, Dawn's going to take over.
Hello, thank you. So next, what we talked to students about was that there's different teaching styles and learning styles, as we know. Some of them can be teacher-centered or student-centered or a combination of both, hybrid method. In the traditional class that, many of us, very familiar with, right? Teacher-centered, it relies primarily on lectures, direct instruction. So that's typically what we think of a lecture hall, right? A professor up there giving a lecture, whether it be PowerPoint or whatnot. We, of course, want students to read the material before class, just to kind of get those key terms, within their heads so they kind of can anticipate what the lecture is going to be about. Of course, using their syllabus as a guide to know what topics will be covered and when. And then during the class in a traditional classroom, basically students, they listen to lecture, right? Primarily through passive learning and note-taking, right? All too often now with the traditional classroom, it's very easy, right, for students to daydream, right? Their mind goes elsewhere, or every 5 minutes they're pulling out their phone to check who's texted them or whatnot. Also, when I've even observed just more recently, I sat in the back of a general lecture hall, and it was really interesting to see of the students that had laptops out, you'd think what to take notes, right, during lecture, but they're doing everything but that. They're watching TikTok videos, they're watching a movie. Unbelievable, right? Just the things that they're actually doing during a lecture. So, it is more passive learning, and that's maybe even being generous, right? They may be just physically there, but mentally they're not even listening. But, it depends on also, we know the professor, right? How dynamic the instructor is to engage them. So there are some traditional classrooms where students are actively learning, right? They are engaged. In that mode of instruction, we also then tell students that, it's still recommended after class, right? You're doing something, right? Homework, right? You're kind of testing your learning at some level. A flipped classroom is often used in science classes. And it basically means that it's, instead of the traditional classroom where it's teacher-centered, it's more student-centered. And that means that we put more on the students ahead of class time, before the class. Students are asked to complete different readings, watch videos, maybe do a learning module, maybe even take a pre-quiz, right, for the lecture. But by doing this ahead of time, it really then, in a sense, it draws attention to what's going to be covered even more so, where students get more familiar with the key concepts. So when they go to lecture, they're not hearing a key term for the first time. They not only have seen it before, but maybe know the definition of it. So looking at their textbook, they're maybe reading, the intro, maybe looking at the, intro, and then looking back to the summary or different parts in the chapter with, some practice problems. But really getting an idea of what's going to be talked about ahead of time and familiar with the key terms, the concepts. Again, very critical so that then when they do get to class, it's not that they're hearing it for the first time. They're more receptive to actually learning it, listening a little bit more. During the class time in a flipped classroom, it's more active learning, okay? Not just kind of sitting back there and listening to a lecture. There might be demonstrations or science experiments that the instructor shows, but it's related to the coursework and what they're supposed to be learning. So again, it's more active learning. There might even be questions. In a big, large lecture hall, it's not, really doable to have, questions and answers, back and forth. But if it's a smaller classroom, 20, 30, there might be a few questions where students actually are engaged in answering questions. And that's also good for the instructor, right? Because they can kind of gauge how our students learning, right? Are they with me, or do I need to, take a step back and cover something a little bit more in depth and whatnot? Also in the flipped classroom, after class, it's not simply just doing homework, right? And we all know that students, after they go to lecture, if homework is assigned, especially, for example, like in a math course or a physics course, if they are engaged, right, in doing the math or the physics problem, they might say, oh yeah, I know how to do this, right? We covered this in lecture. I was able to follow along. I'm good enough. But after class with a flipped classroom, it actually goes deeper into the understanding of the material, checking that knowledge. And it could be even more complex homework problems or tasks that are asked to do within the flipped classroom. So again, the flipped classroom, sometimes traditional classrooms are still used, but often flipped classes are used in science.
Yeah. And I will actually just jump in and say we do this in biology as well. Even some of our large lecture classes will do flipped classroom, and we'll group the students and expect that they aren't just listening to a lecture. So even sometimes in those big classes, they still do we'll still do flipped classroom, and they tend to have peer assisted learning and folks that will help navigate the class. But it's not just small classes that do flipped classroom in sciences.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And there is something I think is important that we do talk to students about, is that, quite often the subjects that I advise are physics, astronomy, biomedical physics, also environmental science and geology. But primarily, I would say in the step-by-step process problem solving, such as physics, I quite often, as you may have experienced also as advisors, when you get students come to you saying, well, my friend is in, also physics 1, algebra class, and they have a different instructor. And the course is completely different, and they might even be complaining that my instructor is, harder, or we have to do all this stuff, or the exam, or this isn't fair, or whatnot. So it's important that we as advisors, we do, are aware, and we do let students know that, there is academic freedom. And there's a link there that, later you can, click on, and it basically talks about it. It's a freedom for research, basically for professors, in the advancement of truth, right? That scientific method, testing the hypothesis, trying to develop theories about different concepts and so forth, involved in research, right? Of course, we're a research institution. So freedom in research is very, very important, but also that freedom in teaching. And the freedom in teaching isn't just to protect the rights of the teacher of how they want to teach, but it also gives the student the freedom to learn and how they learn, right? According to how things are taught. So they kind of go hand in hand. But it's important to kind of stress to students that there is, that academic freedom where teachers, as long as they're adhering to the university guidelines, right? And the objectives of the course, which are usually listed in the syllabus, that they can basically teach the material as they would like, right? They can explore, discuss, teach that subject material in any way to get the point across. Of course, always being respectful, to students and so forth, and, using the university guidelines to meet the objectives. So it's important to let students know and remind them, yes, it can be the same course, but the course can be completely different. Usually departments are pretty good about this, right? If there maybe is a complaint or something, chairs of the department or whatnot, or program director, sometimes we'll even compare two different courses and see, okay, what are their final grades, right? Are they comparable, within statistical, mean or so forth, to see, okay, yeah, might be a little bit of a difference, but not overly, drastic difference, in the content being learned and also the grades that students earn.
Yep.
So the next one, in addition to different teaching styles, right, we know that students learn differently, right? Many different ways. And it's important, as talking to a student, to ask that student, how do you learn? How do you learn best? And different ways that student learn are listed here, visual, right? Primarily that students will see information. We learn from diagrams, pictures, charts, photos, videos, presentations, but visually. Many students are visual learners. Also, some students are auditory. They need to hear it, right? And it reinforces what they're learning by hearing it. So learning by listening, the lecture discussions, audio recordings, Rebecca made mention, even if you go back, right, you can, if a lecture is recorded, right, a student could go back and listen to it, right, to see what they've missed, even maybe the first time. Kinesthetic, hands-on activities, actually learning by doing and experiencing. Reading and writing, often through, written materials, textbooks, notes. Some students will make flashcards, whether they're digital or handwritten out, right, to kind of learn the concepts and the keywords and so forth. But that's very important. Some students will actually rewrite their notes. Even if the professor provides a PowerPoint, students will go back and write those concepts out. That connection from writing to the hand to the brain, right, and getting that information into the long-term memory more often. And of course, there's other learning styles, and most often, students will use a combination of them. We took a poll at our session that we did before classes started of the students that attended, the 30, and many students, when we asked, as we presented each one of these learning styles, who, learned for this way, that way, and then at the end, how many students did a combination? And of course, even ourselves, right? We often learn in a combination of different styles. So we asked students, what kind of learner are you? And it's important that they identify how they learn best, but also in what environment they learn best. Just recently, I met with a student and she said she's just having a really hard time studying and focusing. And she primarily studies at home and she commutes to campus. And talking to her a little bit more, she said she has 5 brothers and sisters. She's always busy and she's getting distracted. Well, that might not be the best environment to learn, right? So we looked at her schedule and she had like a 2-hour block. I said, how about going to the library, right? And dedicating time there to study in a quiet environment. Also knowing what worked for you in high school, right? A student may not work in college, and that they may need to try something different. Quite often students are surprised, right? They had a high GPA in school, maybe learning came easy to them, they did very well, and then all of a sudden they get, to the first, courses here in the college level, university level, and they're shocked that they got a C, right? And some students are just devastated by it, right? And it can really affect them in their other courses because now they don't know what to do, right? But what works in one class may not work for another class even, right? And how they used to study may not now work. So again, it's like trial and error as you progress, not just the first semester, but all through the college experience at the university here. And talking to Rebecca earlier before we did the presentation, I liked how she said, you have to play to your strengths, right? So do what works for you. If you have a friend, right, and you take classes together, they might like to study early in the morning, right? Get up at 6 a.m. and start studying. Well, if you're not a morning person, that's not going to work, right, for a student. So each student will have a different schedule and have to make sure also that the schedule matches that student. That's something that they learn, right? Again, to kind of trial and error. And also us, we know that as advisors, students learn at different rates. They have different aptitudes, right? Things that they're maybe better at compared to other things. right? And they have different preferences, maybe for morning classes, evening classes, and other things. Important to also remind students, right, that they have to be receptive to learning and be engaged. I mean, it sounds obvious, right? But we need to be physically and mentally present, right? Rebecca touched upon this some, maybe even spiritually, right? Praying that you get a good grade on an exam, right? But attending class, we know, is very, very important. I am still, I think, semester to semester surprised by students that say they don't attend the class because it's online, and it's being recorded, or it's in person being recorded. And they could have attended, but they chose not to. And there are times where they might not be able to attend, but sometimes they just regularly do not go to class and they just rely on listening to the recordings. Well, a lot of times, right, that students, sometimes they don't get back to those recordings, and it's not the same as being in class. Be on time, don't leave class early. Sometimes you might have to leave early or arrive a little bit late. But in general, also kind of, sharing with students that, it's not really respectful to constantly come in late and leave early. It can be disruptive, not to only classmates, but to the instructor as well, right? Of course, doing homework assignments, even if you can follow along in the lecture and think, oh yeah, this is easy, I know how to do this, it's still important to practice the problems. One common thing that I see in like physics courses is that students, they're like, oh, I can follow along. This is just algebra. I know how to do this, right? Now I understand the concept. But it's the actual practice of doing the problem where they get quicker at doing it. So when they go for the exam, right, physics exam, they may have only an hour to do 10 questions. If they haven't actually practiced the problems, not know how to do them, but actually practice them, then they might not be able to get through the entire exam. They're just not quick enough with it. So being prepared for exams is important. Also making mention that the format of the exams, right? Some of the exams may be in person, hard copy exam, or maybe even in-person online exams. What is a student used to doing for an exam? For example, if it's a synchronous class on Zoom and they're used to, just listening to problems, but then as in our physics courses, if it's online, we have students come in person to take the exams. Are they ready mentally, right, physically, to be able to then make that shift to be doing the problems, in person? And in person, they're still online exams. Are they doing their homework written on paper, right, and practicing it that way? And then all of a sudden they have to do an exam online. So that's also important, right, so that the student is prepared to take that exam in the format that it's offered. And it may include handwriting. Sometimes there's conceptual questions. Is a student prepared to write a paragraph, right, about this subject? So that's important because some of our, students, they might not have had to have that practice before of actually writing out, a paragraph about it. There's a difference between memorization and understanding, as we know. Understanding requires one to think about how the concepts, right, are related to each other and to one another and to other things. An example is quite often I'll have students that take multiple choice questions, and through talking with them, if they did not do well on the exam, they said that they didn't find that key word, right, that they were looking for. So sometimes it's not just the key word. The key word can be explained differently, either in the question or in the answers. So it's a combination of putting the question, knowing what the question is asking, then looking at each individual answer, knowing what the answer is giving, and then putting the two together, right? So it's the process of how a student looks at the question, even if it is multiple choice. Are they actually understanding what they're reading and then putting everything together? And as we know, understanding involves critical thinking, applying the knowledge, and problem solving, right? Not just memorizing. Developing a mindset to learn is also extremely important, right? And one example I like to talk about is breaking down the wall. I see this a lot, especially in my physics courses, biomedical physics courses, and it can be in other courses as well, non-science courses. Quite often, just recently, a student came into my office and said, well, I got this physics problem and it was about a train on a track, and it's going so fast, but then there's, wind resistance, and then there's another train next to it that's going 10 more miles per hour faster, but then we have to convert it into meters. And then there was an airplane that flied overhead, which had nothing to do with the problem. And all of a sudden they just said, I don't know what to do. I can't do this. Well, it's a process, right, of being receptive, break down the concepts, write down what's given, Find out what the question's asking you to solve. What have you already learned? Looking at different equations, thinking of it simply, and then kind of step by step, breaking it down, right? A lot of times I find that students in all different subjects, they put up a wall, even in foreign language, I see it a lot with my science students. They're like, I would rather take 5 other science courses than a foreign language class, because they put up a wall and say, I can't learn language. So having them, try to break that wall down, finding out what makes them anxious about it. If they looked at it in a different perspective, right? Could that help? If they do struggle, reminding students to seek help early is important, right? But if they're having difficulty, not just say, I need help, but try to define, right? What is it that you are having difficulty with? You actually have to try to clarify that. Students sometimes not are always good at that, right? So that's important, right? For them to be able to define what they're having trouble with. Of course, having that mindset to learn involves focusing, right, on the material, not having the distractions, discipline, time management, and asking questions, right? How many times as advisors, we, remind students, ask questions. Don't be shy, right, to ask questions. Ask the same question if you need to, right? And once you learn more, you'll realize things that you don't know, right? And that will lead to even more questions. And try to make the learning relevant and fun. I think that's important for students to remember. Yep. And just other couple quick notes about being receptive to learning and being engaged. Learning from others, right, as we know, is very important for students. Making personal contacts with classmates. I remind my students when I first meet with them, even before classes start, especially if it's a freshman student, in the first week or two, look around in the class, kind of see, maybe who you could connect with. It's really kind of sad, I feel, that I hear from students that but go into a lecture hall and no students talk to each other. They're all on their phone and they just, go to lecture and then they leave, right? Try to, encourage students to make those personal contacts with their classmates. Get their, their phone number so they can, text them, right? Form a group chat. Form study groups, right? Either on campus or off campus, right? Attend tutoring, SI sections, study sessions is very also useful. And one thing I think that's hard for our students to do is attending office hours, right? The instructor office hours. They feel a little kind of apprehensive, what do I say to a professor, and so forth. But trying to encourage students to do so is important. Telling them that, when you do go to an instructor's office for their office hours, try not just to say, I don't understand this material. To me, that's, it's not a valid answer. A student first has to be a little more prepared, right, just to try to identify, clarify what they are struggling with. Maybe having the problem listed in their notes saying that I understood it up to this point, and then I thought this, but then when I get to this step, that's where I'm not sure, right? And trying to clarify that with the professor during their office hours. Again, ask questions, right? And then also being involved, right? For a student to be involved, like in a student organization, the link to DOSO there, the Dean of Students Office, many, many different, organizations. And it doesn't have to be in a student's major. We even have a squirrel watching club, believe it or not, right? It's really interesting how it started. It was kind of started as a joke, but then it became like a real club. And many students belong to that, right? And it's actually, they go out in the field and they actually watch squirrels, and it's just kind of cool. They talk about different things in the anatomy of squirrels and different habitats, ecosystems, and so forth. It's all different types, right, of student organizations related to majors, minors, or not, right? Lots of fun things to do. It is proven that getting involved, right, for a student to be involved, then they're more, apt to kind of, form relationships. It decreases their anxiety, right? They become more social, and they're more able to get, seek out help if needed. Yep. And lastly, for me, just a couple quick things about learning from the internet and AI. Obviously, the capabilities for learning have, really increased with AI, artificial intelligence. And they're great for quick clarifications of a problem, step-by-step problem solving even, for papers, projects. I often have physics students that will use AI, right, if they're stuck on a physics problem, right, just to figure out, oh, that's what they did, right? But then what they need to do, right, and some students are not doing it. They may use AI just to quickly get their homework, done, to turn it in to get some points. But it's really important, right, when using AI, internet, as we know, right, there is bias out there, right? So that's one concern. but also inaccurate information, right? Also security, right? Different sites. We might have to be careful about what sites we're actually looking up information. And also the growing dependence, right, that our students are having on AI. That is a huge concern. I know that we regularly talk about that in both of my departments. That, students, are they critically thinking? Are they really learning anymore? Are they just looking something up to quickly get it done? Are they making the connections? And that will quickly catch up with the student as they get into their more advanced courses. So AI can be a great tool, but also, using it, in a certain way that it still encourages learning. And it's important to follow the guidelines, the university guidelines, and there's the code of conduct. Okay, the work needs to be the student's work. Often, just recently, we've had a lot of student papers that they've had to turn in for term papers. Really interesting how a professor says, oh, I got 3 term papers that are identical, right? And this happened before, obviously. But with AI, a student can just say, oh, change this format or change this parameter and make it a little bit different or just change something on their own, right? It's really important that the work is their own. And there's a few links down there below. There's a code of conduct, just the general code of conduct that I think it's important just to kind of share that with students. But also AI at Wayne State, some general guidelines there and help. And then Warrior GPT, the generative AI, is what is recommended. There's different chatbots out there, Chat GPT and so on. But Warrior GPT is the one that, is recommended, and there's a lot more information about that.
Excellent. Awesome. Thanks, Dawn. So we just wanted to also go back and kind of reiterate for students how to use textbooks effectively. So a lot of students don't necessarily use the textbook how it's intended to be used. We know textbooks are very dry. They're written, especially for science, in complex terms, and they're not the most fun tool to sit down and use. But I like to remind students that when you're using your textbook, you're not supposed to sit down and read the whole chapter through like you do a nonfiction book that's more fun. So the textbook is more of a tool to use for study methods. It's important to make sure, though, that they're keeping context in mind. So making sure that they're reading headers so that they're understanding what they're reading about so that it helps them process the information. We also talk to them about how to utilize the textbook effectively by doing tactics like skimming a chapter. So instead of sitting down and reading all of chapter 8, review the title, look at the headers, charts, and graphs and pictures, read the learning outcomes, and read the summarization. And that gives you a better footing for what that chapter covers. And then you can go back in and familiarize yourself with areas where you're lacking knowledge, but not necessarily having to sit down and read all of the chapter from beginning to end, which is very complicated to do, and students burn out from it and then stop using the textbook to study. But then the other tool we like to remind students about, and the benefit of getting textbooks and utilizing them, is almost every textbook is going to have questions at the end of the chapter that can help you in your review sessions, with giving you some questions on how to quiz yourself. I love when students write their own quizzes, but if you wrote your own quiz, then you also know the correct answers because you wrote the questions. So this is a great way to test your knowledge by utilizing a quiz that somebody else created or questions that somebody else created to help you review. So that was just what we talked about with textbooks. And now I'm going to flip over to Erin to talk about resources that are on campus. And again, these are more specific to biochemistry and physics resources.
Yeah, so basically, we wanted to provide all the students with a list of different resources they can use if they're running into trouble. But usually when I'm talking to students, I bring these up even like their first appointment so that they're aware, because the students that actively participate in like a study group or go to a peer mentor or a graduate student each week are going to be more engaged in the course, and they're getting more positive feedback since our course sizes are so large. This is a way that students can get that one-on-one attention that they're really seeking, or smaller group attention. And so there several different places that the students can go, and a lot of times this information is provided to the students in their Canvas pages for their courses, but the students don't always realize it. So it's good to point it out to students, especially when they're coming in to ask for help or they're doing repeats. The big one we listed, Academic Success Center, because they provide the most variety of topics. And we talk to the students about going for the one-on-one tutoring, or going to supplemental instruction when it's available, or doing the study groups, putting a petition for a study groups, the study skills coaching, and all the different workshops that are there, because some students are just struggling in general. So then I'll tell them maybe go to the different workshops on navigating the textbook or something that they need to also learn as well as a specific topic. Within departments, we have peer mentors and learning assistants available. So like for chemistry, in the front of the chemistry building on the CAS side, we just have a bunch of tables and whiteboards. And there's various little groups forming for each class. They have a sign with the schedule. So we have basically the general chemistry and organic peer mentors. They're there Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5. Students can just walk in. There's no appointment required. And a lot of our students will kind of sit at a table like the whole day. They'll just be there all Monday. And as the peer mentors come, they talk to the different peer mentors. They talk to the different students that are coming, and they've been forming their own study groups, which I think is awesome. And it's good. I can see definite improvement on the students that are regularly participating, since the atrium is like right in front of my office. So I kind of see the students and the TAs, and I see them regularly, and I know who's going and really who isn't. The STEM Commons building also is like a great place though too for the biology and the physics courses. The students can go there too, and similar thing, they can just kind of hang out and study there, and they can get to know other students. For these big courses, it's really helpful for them to get to know other students that are in the class, because unlike what they're used to in high school, they have to seek stuff out as a college student. They have to find these resources, and they have to utilize them. But as advisors, we can just keep reminding them of their presence. So like every time you talk to a student, you might want to mention, hey, well, have you checked out the peer mentors, or have you checked out the tutoring at the Academic Success Center? The physics graduate assistants as well provide help fall and winter courses. So I have a website link for that. And basically, like, I give all these links out to my students, but I tell them they just have to find somebody and a place that they feel comfortable with. Because some students like more the one-on-one tutoring that's available through the Academic Success Center versus our sessions that are a little bit more like 3 or 4 students hanging out in the atrium. Some students like their TA better than the learning assistant that's on Monday at the same time. So they might go to the Chemistry Learning Center to meet with their TA. So I tell them to just kind of find a resource that they like. And so what I just mentioned also, so there's a Math Resource Center. I didn't include that before, which has their resources throughout campus. And then the Chemistry Learning Center, which is also in the atrium, sort of confusing with the peer mentors, but those are our grad students. And they provide extra tutoring hours for all the 1,000 and 2,000 level courses in the Chemistry Learning Center. That schedule is not available online due to some limitations from our dean's office. Some of you have contacted me in the past for it. You can continue to contact me for it because we're not able to post it currently online. The instructors are putting the Learning Center schedule in Canvas for the students, but I always have a copy. So if anybody ever needs the Chemistry Learning Center schedule or the peer mentor schedules for chemistry, feel free to contact me, and I can get them to you. And then we also encourage the students to regularly participate in the faculty office hours, because if you go to meet with your instructor after your exam, they can very quickly tell you what happened. Like, I took this exam, I thought I was going to do better than I did. The instructor will go through the exams with the student and kind of pinpoint where they need to put their focus. Also getting to know them so that, later on, if you need letters of recommendation, they will remember you if you go to office hours. So it's like a little plus that we always tell students to do. It's going to benefit them to get help from the instructor during office hours, but they don't realize long-term that if they don't think that it's going to help them, just go, because you might get that instructor, you might need a letter from them so you can get to know that instructor. And once again, like I said, I tell the students to find a resource that they like. I meet with a lot of repeat students for chemistry. So we go over all the different resources that are available, and I have them usually sign a contract at the end that they have to, attend one of these regularly. But I basically say, like, if you make a point to go to peer mentoring once a week, you're going to prepare yourself more for that session than you will for lecture. Because in lecture, you should be preparing, but you could zone out. Whereas if you're going to talk to your peer mentor, you got to be ready with some questions to actually talk about the topic. So that will kind of keep you on task so that you don't put off studying for the week, because you know you're going to talk to that peer mentor specifically every Monday. So like pick a time, pick a person, and go to it weekly is my best advice for all the students. You can go more if you want to, but at least go once a week is kind of what I tell everybody.
All right.
And then there's a couple off-campus resources. I didn't want to put too many because we wanted to keep to stuff that we know is legitimate. And like, because there's YouTube videos, my students will tell me sometimes they looked up how to solve problems on YouTube videos, but we don't know always if they're getting accurate information. Also, sometimes they could be solving problems differently than how the instructor is teaching it, which can lead to some confusion in the classroom. So what we provided was Khan Academy for like all subjects. There's a few more chemistry because I was putting them in there. The American Chemical Society has educational resources on their website. That's my go-to for everything chemistry. Like they have college to career advice. They have a lot of great stuff on there. And then a lot of our students use ChemDraw. So there's a link where they can get into using that for free because they can use it to draw structures. And then open access chemistry textbooks. It's a search engine where students can find those resources online. And then there's a site that is actually paid, but it's helpful for students. It has tutorials and practice problems on organic chemistry. So I have the Master Organic Chemistry website. And then I know I talked to Becca. She said the bio instructors are usually recommending that the students go to their Pearson's website for their textbook because they have a lot of resources. And I did look at it. It's not just bio. They do have chemistry and they have physics and other topics in there as well. And then I provided the National Science Foundation educational resources for biology. Since it's from the National Science Foundation, that's a little bit more legit resource. And then MIT has open courseware for students that they can kind of just listen to lectures and different things online. And we provided all these to the students after our presentation. And I even got some emails from the students afterward that were thanking us for the presentation. So hopefully they're going to utilize some of the resources.
Yes. So, and then the last thing, and when we kind of put up the thank you slide too, we did talk like a reminder to students about the difference with college and high school is accountability. So again, they have to hold themselves accountable to using these resources. They have to be the ones that reach out for help. And it's not that professors don't care. It's just that so many professors have 900 students per semester that they're teaching that they have to rely on the students to be the ones to advocate for themselves. So whether it be asking for help or utilizing the resources, going to office hours, that's not something that the teacher's going to make sure that they're doing. That's something that they need to make sure that they're doing. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing now. And I don't know if we had any questions.
I don't have a question, but I'll add a comment. This was really great to see, and it's nice to make sure that we're all on the same page coming from like a pre-med, pre-PA, pre-dental perspective. So thank you guys.
Yeah, so we're trying to figure out too kind of how to get this information out to students as well. Again, ahead of let's not wait till you're failing or till you've messed up. Let's try and get this to you before the semester starts. So I think we all have Canvas pages for our majors that we're going to get it in to our students. But if you all want this information, we're happy to send out the PowerPoint if you need it to be able to help relay this out to your students as well.
Yeah, definitely send
I
it to
did.
us. Are you planning to do it again in January or December?
I don't know, maybe. We'll have to,
If
I
you
mean,
do, that's
yeah,
definitely an area
yeah,
where we could cross promote, and I think it's very
okay,
helpful for
yeah,
students. So in my opinion, it's worthwhile. Whether or not the
mm,
students think it is, I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah.
Are there
Perhaps
any faculty who like like have you we talked to faculty about sharing the information because I'm thinking of our
hmm
pre-majors who aren't like one of your majors but are taking
hmm
these courses to get into professional medical, whatever
yeah,
school.
yeah. So I think a lot of the professors do more of the sharing of the resources, but not necessarily the study skill side. So that's where we're trying to figure out what's the best way to get this information to the students. And we've talked about recording it, but we know a student's not going to sit down and watch a 45-minute presentation. So we got to figure out a different way to get this to students, and maybe we have to batch it out and do sections or things like that. But it's something that we're still considering how to get this to students for sure.
And there might be an option to do it like at the Academic Success Center as a workshop, perhaps. So that's something that we're going to take a look into.
Oh, Jessica, you're muted, or your camera.
Audio is not working, but she's not
Audio.
muted.
Okay, yeah, no, you're right.
Wait, I think I just heard you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
It's its
spotty.
laptop. Can you hear me now? It's
Yeah.
gotta be like close to me. Sorry about that. Geez, I meet with quite a few students especially with our new Bachelor's of Applied Health Sciences program. They're taking biology courses. And they just don't know what to do. I mean, I asked them if they have the book, no, I just read through the PowerPoints and, did you happen to look in the book? So we, review some of those things as well as I give them some of the resources, but this was great. I will definitely be sharing this, within our college for those students.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, I get that a lot, especially in my major of, when I ask students, why did you pick biology as your major? They're like, oh, because I liked my high school biology class. I'm like, well, that's great, but it's going to be very, very different now studying this as your major at university. So yes, just getting that difference out to students is key. Mhm.
Yeah, it's a big shift for them. I had an
Mhm.
intro astronomy student that said they're struggling. Just the teacher just gets up there and talks. And I said, well, did you look at the book? No.
Mhm.
They just sometimes I don't think they just don't even know that, this is what maybe they should be doing that could be helpful. So yeah, getting that out there.
And I think they learn from each other too. So that's why out of like all the resources that we have, I think the peer mentors or the supplemental instructors at the academic success centers, like the undergraduates teaching each other, I think they learn study skills better that way. And then they have somebody to go to for advice for other courses too. So once they get to know some of the peer mentors, they ask them, I'm going to take this course in a later semester, because most of these resources are for the introductory courses too. Once you get into like the upper level STEM courses, then it's a whole different area where you're not going to find a peer mentor or a tutor so much. And in those cases, I have the students work on making their own study groups. Like I say, send something out through Canvas to the class to ask if anybody wants to get into a study group, offer to bake cookies or something. And you'd be surprised they come and they all talk to each other and they start to, help each other, and just giving students spaces for it. So like I said, in our atrium, our students are welcome if they just want to go to a table and meet together.
Else? I'm going to stop the recording. I will send out